Hi, and welcome to another episode of Book Reviews with Johnny Boy, John Henry. And today we are talking about The Reckless Decade, America in the 1890s by H.W. Brands, author of The First American. So this book is called The Reckless Decade, America in the 1890s. So it is, published 1995, or copywritten, I guess, published then. It is a history book. So it sounds like this guy is a history professor, the University of Texas in Austin at that time. And I wanted to know about American history. I want to know more about. I just love history of the world, of humanity, beyond humanity too, of our planet Earth and the cosmos. But since I am American and I do live in New York, I like things that pertain to American history, pertain to New York or Brooklyn history, whatever can feel tangible to my life is a little extra interesting. So, I thought I've been interested in covering songs from the 1890s before and early 1900s as well. So I thought I should know a little bit about the 1890s. I'm going to do that music. What was the spirit of the times? And all right, well, so I'll tell you that this is pretty well written for a history book. Some history can be very bone dry, and this gets into human stories, and it's not completely neutral. He has his opinions come through in his writing, which I think is better because at least it makes it more tasty to read. You could choose if you agree with the author's perspectives or not, but at least it's more tasty to have that human flavor in it instead of just like some very dry, and it's not a bunch of dates or anything like that. The dates are there, but it's more about the human stories within it. So I'll just name the chapters and kind of roughly describe what they're about. The prologue, coming of age or coming apart. So 1890s was a point where it just really seemed like it was a mess. It's a reckless decade. It was a messy time, and it seemed like we could be going downhill, America, or we could really be getting stronger, going into a whole new phase. And you could be the judge of what happened, but it was kind of a turning point era. And then, the first chapter, The Lost Frontier, starts off with this like race in Oklahoma to, for people to claim land. Like if they could race from one city to this next frontier and put their stake in first, they get to own that land. So it was like a brutal race to get there. And that happened once in a while. And Oklahoma was one of the places where it happened. And that was kind of around the time where the frontier of this like westward expansion of the U.S. was coming to an end. There was no more territory to expand into, not so much. And so it gives you a taste of that kind of Wild West feeling. Then In Morgan We Trust is the next chapter. A lot about Pierpont Morgan, but also there's a lot of stuff about, I think it was that chapter about Rockefeller and Carnegie. And I watched the documentary, and that's how we originally pronounced it. We say Carnegie usually. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and a bunch of other kind of robber barons of that time. You kind of get the picture of how much power they had and why that happened, because of the America's priority for big business. America loved freedom of economy, if that's the right way to put it. So there was like this, the government allowed big business to kind of run the show. I don't know if they allowed it. It kind of couldn't really help it because it was such a force. And then how, like, I think it was Cleveland, Pierpont helped, J.P. Morgan helped save the country in this like economic crisis in the 1890s. It's kind of interesting. Then we jump to how the other half lived. And you get, who's the guy who wrote those expose books, like The Jungle? Well, that guy. And then Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis was this really great writer, I guess journalist, who was an author maybe, who was exposing, author too, the life in the slums of New York in particular. And it was brutal, very sad, depressing to read about life in the slums of New York City, like Lower East Side, I think, like kind of just over the Manhattan Bridge in Manhattan, in that area, and the tenements, and how a wife jumping out of a window, ending her life because she couldn't take it anymore, would barely turn any heads because it was that depressing there. Nobody would question why she would do that. It was that harsh. Living in a very cramped environment with super limited running water, like one faucet per sometimes building, with numerous families living in one building with one like faucet at the first floor, and then you have to go to the bathroom in the backyard or something. Unimaginable nightmare situation for us who live in relative comfort nowadays, or more than relative comfort. But good to know that, good to appreciate our own situation. Then of course talks about where the white immigrants went versus where the black former slaves were living, and different ethnic groups, and Chinese, Irish, Italian, stuff like that. Okay, then Blood on the Water. I believe that was about like how strikers, there was this famous rebellion at one of Carnegie's factories and steel factory. They were just stood up for their rights to work less, get paid more, that type of thing. And it was like attempt to put down by Pinkertons, which is like this like hired police. It was a bloody battle and wasn't good. It wasn't good. So things like that, and other talks about Chicago and other stories of unions standing up to power. And the matter with Kansas, I kind of forgot exactly what that is. Except then there was like this march on Washington, again which had to do with people out of work, and so like they figured if all these people out of work march on Washington, would like force the government to create more jobs. There's a lot more detail. There's a lot of history. And then Plessy versus Crow. So then we get into where the country was at with race relations and human rights, and Jim Crow laws and stuff that was really kind of a dark cloud over U.S. history. But if you read it, and it's not fun to read or anything, but we could appreciate that, even though it seems there's a lot of divisiveness and stuff in the media nowadays, compared to what I'm reading about back then, it seems we've come a long way in terms of, let's say the families, descendants of former slaves, or just generally people of color now holding positions of authority, being able to be millionaires and billionaires, I don't know, possibly, and respected positions. There's racism still exists, of course, but not nearly at the same degree level it was back then. Obviously, we don't have to sit in separate train cars nowadays and stuff like that. People can vote. So cross of gold, tongue of silver was another one, which had to do, okay, there's this gold versus silver thing going on in politics in the 1890s, and it was connected to a Great Depression that hit the country in the 1890s. And there was some political groups were like the Silverites, and some were the Goldite, more gold, but then gold bugs. And then there was crossover, of course. There's a guy named William Jennings Bryan who ran for 2 terms as a Democrat. He was a really silver guy, very outspoken, kind of young and flashy, but he didn't win in either situation, but he's a fascinating figure at that time. Even the presidents, like that guy is more interesting than the presidents to me. You got Grover Cleveland. Who the heck was the next guy? Damn. I guess he wasn't that interesting that I could forget him. Well, okay, the guy that Roosevelt succeeded. So Roosevelt comes in, McKinley. Yeah, there you go, McKinley. Roosevelt comes in the last chapter called Democratic Imperialism. You start to hear about him more, Theodore Roosevelt. And he was like a warmonger. I didn't know, like, yeah, he wanted war. He kind of like almost for the right reasons, but of course war has no right reasons, but he wanted to stem injustice abroad and spread the American policies that he felt were more just and democratic, and I mean, certainly not what I agree with, but anyway, that was fascinating. Democratic imperialism. You saw how this is the point where U.S. got a navy, and that we got involved with the Spanish-American War in Cuba and Philippines at the same time. So you saw, okay, this is the point where America really becomes this like world power and starts getting involved with other countries' business, even though it seemed pretty anti-American to be imperialistic, like what we were trying to get away from in Europe, in the old world, you know, the Dutch and the English and the Spanish, Portuguese having like building empires. We didn't want to be like them, but then here we are acting like that because our hands were a little bit tied, American hands were a little bit tied, thinking, well, if we let the Spanish push around the Cubans and have them in really, you know, unsavory conditions in their own land, and this is on our part of the hemisphere, and we had business interests, America had business interests in Cuba, it just wasn't really acceptable, so you kick them out. And I don't know what happened to Cuba exactly, but with the Philippines, similar thing happened, and then it was felt like it would be better to annex Philippines than to leave them to govern themselves, because they didn't really show that they were capable of it, according to the leaders at the time. And they were afraid that if they left the Philippines to their own devices, very soon another imperial power would come and take advantage of it, and then it would become the English, or the Portuguese, or someone else would take over. So Americans were in a tough situation, like, well, give them their independence, but it might make things worse. So if America kind of like guides them for a while, whatever, that's kind of what happened. And then America got involved in this imperialistic game. in that time period. 1890s was when that was going on. Then there's a little bit of a prologue, epilogue, and he kind of like tied up some, not loose ends, but he kind of showed where some of the issues he talks about in the book, where it ended up 100 years later, throughout the next 100 years, because he wrote it in 1995, and where we advanced, where we maybe didn't advance. That part was a little confusing because there's a lot in a small chapter, but overall, I enjoyed it. It didn't take me very long to read. I'm a little surprised. It was almost 400 pages, and the font is, like that. No pictures besides the cover. Nothing. Long bibliography, and of course, and there's an index. But did I feel like the decade was reckless? Sure. And then I went to, of course, watch some documentaries in between about characters in there to go a little deeper, and I feel like I know a lot more about that era of American history than I did before. Probably a lot more than the average American would know, for sure. Why would you know that, I don't remember being taught about any of that in detail. Some themes were familiar from high school social studies class type of thing, but global studies, history. All right, well, that's all for now. I'm gonna move on. Enjoy your day and keep on reading.